Hey, welcome to WACTS. This is episode 45. This week we're covering what I did from December 7th to December 14th, 2015. I think this is going to be kind of another stream of consciousness episode just because this has been a really cool week and it's mostly going to be best fun to speak right, to talk about if I say it chronologically. So, let's begin with early last week, where all sorts of stuff was going on in my office. Super busy, but good work. Some VR, some not. Skipping ahead, let's skip right over to Thursday, because that's when things get started. Thursday I had my holiday presentation, and so that was a really cool thing I put together very quickly in the morning, because the week was so busy. I've been doing this thing for my office just a couple years now, this year and last year, where I just kind of give like an update on, what I'm doing with technology, and so it was just, basically a rundown of all the stuff I've been talking about on this show over the course of the year. Everything going on with the Park Avenue Armory, and using VR as like an iterative tool and not just a presentation tool. And if you hear that in the background, that's Liz cooking a very tasty smelling dinner, which is great. Anyway, I heard a lot of really nice compliments after the presentation, that people seem to really like it, which is great, A, because it was put together very last minute, and B, because I require validation from others to feel good. By the way, holiday presentations, there's usually some silly ones. It's a chance for everyone to kind of talk about the work that's been going on over the course of the year. And again, my company is structured. One half FDA that I'm a part of, we do theater rigging, lighting, and planning, so the actual design of theaters. The other half, the office, which is both offices are connected by Jules Fisher, 10-time Tony Award-winning lighting designer. The other half of the office does purely architectural lighting. They actually did the lighting, for example, of the last architecture company I worked for, Zimmer Frasca. One of the old partners at ZGF is also really good friends with one of the partners at FMS, so that's one of those cool things. But anyway, yeah, so, my first year, or I guess my second year, I did a really fun, Breaking Bad presentation when we first got started with the Oculus Rift, and that took up so much time. It was fun, and I learned a lot, but it took up so much time, and so last year it's just like, okay, here's just some cool Oculus stuff that we're doing there, and then this year I was showing, the Google Cardboard stuff, and I also showed the Stephen Colbert project and the lighting stuff for Tree of Codes, and people seem to get a kick out of it. Another big highlight of the holiday presentations was, you might recall early in the year, I worked very briefly with Jules Fisher on Beauty and the Beast, the live-action version, which, is starring Emma Watson as Belle, and Ian McKellen and Johnny Depp and all sorts of other great actors are involved. And, looks like it's going to be really cool. I got to see an early test render at the time of Lumiere, who looked like a nightmare with flaming demon hands and black voids for eyes. So we were trying to figure out a way to deal with lighting in that in a way where Jules could communicate it back to Disney and all that. But anyway, so Jules gave a little presentation at the holiday party of just a little bit about what that was like being on set. And it was just so inspiring and so beautiful. And Beauty and the Beast is a movie that I enjoyed as a kid, but I've come to appreciate much more as my wife has described, her real love and fascination of the film. And so it's really grown in esteem for me as well. And so it was such a cool presentation to see, because it's the Be Our Guest musical number, and so there's the full dining hall, everything's set up, the lighting looks gorgeous. He showed us even a video of one of the takes where you see the camera move, and there's a shot where you have Emma Stone being set up with the lighting and the camera, and not Emma Stone, Emma Watson. I'm still thinking about Spider-Gwen. But anyway, that was really cool. I love how movies are made. As I've mentioned, I watched The Lord of the Rings appendices all the time, and I'm fascinated by that process, and especially as technology changes, I'm always curious to see how those techniques are evolving. So, in that you could see the actual camera moving, and you could see what the camera was seeing as it kind of sweeps across the table. Of course, everything's going to be animated, so that's basically a clean background plate. But then also you can see previs stuff in the other monitors. Here's some of the blocky animated versions of what's going to be dropped in, and then there's Cogsworth, who's the star of that particular moment, played by Ian McKellen, doing a much more detailed animation in a different monitor. So having all those things together, that's really cool. So that was the holiday presentations. That was a lot of fun. And then Friday, actually, I'm going to tell this story real quick. I think this was early morning Friday. No, this would have been Thursday or Wednesday. I had this crazy idea where I was chatting with my friend Dan, and I basically just out of nowhere was kind of like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if the Fast and the Furious movies had like a Christmas version? And Dan was like, yeah, it'd be great. It could be called like The Fast and the Merriest or something like that, or, you know, The Fat and the Furious, or The Fast and Furious Saves Christmas. And so we just started riffing on this idea because, you know, we've had fun talking about how the Fast and the Furious movies started off as these very straight-laced, you know, street racing movies, and I worked on a couple videos for Cracked, I think After Hours, that, you know, explored this concept as well. They started out pretty serious, took themselves pretty seriously, and by the 7th movie they're very self-aware, and they're almost like superhero movies, and there's ridiculous things happening, but it's fun, and, you know, they've really turned it into a fantastic, and I mean that in the traditional sense of the word, a fantastical franchise, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I was thinking how fun would it be to have a Christmas version, and so we're riffing on this. And so kind of what we started playing with was like this idea of like, okay, so imagine that, you know, we have all the crew there. I guess Paul Walker's not involved, unfortunately, but they're all like doing last minute Christmas shopping. It's Christmas Eve, you know, Vin Diesel's out getting a tree, and Tyrese or The Rock or something are out doing like last minute gifts, and they're filling up their cars and all that. And they're all about to say goodbye and head off and spend time with their families for a couple weeks. And then someone suggests like, hey guys, how about one last race before the holidays get started? And, you know, the roads are icy, and there's snow, and there's hail, and all that, and they're like, okay, let's do it. So they start this epic street race, and they're zooming past, blah, 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 doing cool stuff, and then out of nowhere comes this, like, roaring red car, and it's just zipping past all of them, and it's pulling off these moves, swinging in the sky, seeming to defy the laws of physics. It's got these crazy, sparkly fumes coming out of it, and at the end of the race, there's, like, this big crash. Everyone's so confused, but, you know, pulling ahead is this red car, and out of the car comes Ron Perlman, and he's got this epic beard and this big red coat on, and everyone's like, Santa? And he's like, yeah, well, guys, what's up, I'm Santa. And he's got that kind of, you know, Clay from Sons of Anarchy, or his character in Pacific Rim, that kind of demeanor going on, like a really rough, grizzled Santa. But his sleigh, his car there got ruined. By the way, his car, let's be clear about this, all the pistons are named after the different reindeer. So you have on Dasher, on Dancer, on Prancer and Vixen, and that's like switching switches on. And Rudolph, of course, big red nitro button. So, okay, Rudolph, full power! And that's like, you know, crazy nitro. So you have all sorts of fun little lines you can pull from that kind of thing. Yeah, a lot of those lines take on totally different contexts, traditional Santa in this movie. But anyway, his car's broken, what's he gonna do? This car, that's how he's been delivering presents, you know, ever since the advent of vehicles. There's like a very brief explanation of like, yeah guys, I haven't used a sleigh ever since cars became invented. And yeah, so he's got a car, everything's broken. He's like, I don't know what to do, like street racing's this thing that I do to like relax myself on the side, but Mrs. Claus, played by Helen Mirren, who has expressed interest in being in a Fast and Furious movie, doesn't approve of it, so he doesn't want to tell his wife, but he still has to deliver all the presents, and so the Fast and Furious crew were like, it's okay, Santa, we'll help you. He's gonna save Christmas. And so they all start gearing up, and they fix Santa's sleigh to the best they can, but you know, there's still some problems with it, and they take off over the world together trying to deliver presents. And they're all helping out, and they've got, you know, Santa's magic powder so they can fly and do all these crazy flips, and they're throwing presents, you know, down chimneys, they're riding on rooftops, really epic, you know, kind of car chase scenes, stuff that really rivals some of the more ridiculous stunts in the movie so far, you know, driving through skyscrapers and all sorts of crazy stuff. At a certain point, we need some more conflict besides just the car breaking down, and so Jason Statham, who we know, you know, survived the end of the last movie, he comes roaring in this black vehicle like he stole some of Santa's magic powder, and he just wants to ruin Christmas. And everyone's like, who's that? And he's like, I'm Black fucking Peter, or something like that. Everyone knows Black Peter. Anyone who knows who Black Peter is, he's not actually Santa's enemy or anything like that, but it is just a badass sounding name for Jason Statham to go by. So Black Peter, enemy of the movie, enemy of Christmas, trying to destroy Christmas. They all have to battle him. Vin Diesel, as you might recall from Fast and Furious 7, had a couple epic chicken fights with Jason Statham, and so we gotta top that. So they're gonna have this epic chicken fight, probably like in the sky or launching off of rooftops, still while delivering presents, where they smash into each other. But Vin Diesel, you might remember I said, was Christmas tree shopping. You know, he's like this totally last minute thing, like, oh, we got all these presents, we don't have anything to put it under, bringing home a Christmas tree for Christmas Eve. And by the way, you know, we're on the clock here, like everyone has to get home in time to spend a real Christmas with their family. But chicken fight, zooming towards each other, cars smash into each other, and the Christmas tree on Vin Diesel's car flies off the roof and impales Jason Statham through the chest. And then Vin Diesel can have some great line like, Merry Christmas, motherfucker. I don't know. Something better than that. But yeah, so, and of course Jason Statham survives that. But here's a fun thing. So toward the end, the sleigh is just totally broken down, and these guys collectively, try as they might, they just don't have the mechanical expertise to save Santa's sleigh. And they're like, what are we going to do? This is what we need to deliver the presents. And then nick of time, Helen Mirren shows up, Mrs. Claus. She's the best mechanic in the whole freaking world. And so she manages to repair the car. She knew what was going on the whole time. Come on, she's a wife. She knows what her husband's up to. And she goes on this final journey with him as they deliver like the last few presents, and then everyone's arriving just in time for Christmas morning. And so, Vin Diesel, and it's this kind of bittersweet thing, like they did it, they delivered all these presents, but like things got wrecked in the process. A bunch of the presents that say The Rock had in his car. I know The Rock technically isn't part of the crew, but let's say he's involved in this somehow anyway. A lot of the presents that they had, got destroyed while they're delivering everything else. And of course Vin Diesel doesn't have his Christmas tree anymore because, you don't want to pull that out of a body. And so he goes home and he's like looking at all these sad presents on the floor, and he doesn't have a tree. And he goes up and he's like, goes sleep with his wife. Or maybe his wife's just waking up and he's got kids and everything. And they're like, Dad, you're home. It's Christmas. Yay. And he's like, yeah, it's good to see you guys. And he pulls his wife aside. He's like, hey, I got to tell you something. And he wants to explain about not getting a Christmas tree. Now, sorry as he is. But they go downstairs and it's a Christmas miracle. There's a tree. It's beautiful. There's lights. Everything's wonderful. Santa, who is real, has magic and was able to create this wonderful Christmas for him. Cutting to all the other characters, there's presents. One of the guys gets like the big red Rudolph Nitro button. So anyone who had any doubt that this was all a dream and it didn't really happen, there's the proof that Christmas is real and the spirit of it will always live on thanks to the Fast and the Furious guys. So, fun little movie pitch we had. It'd be really fun, I think, to write, at least a treatment, if not a full-blown screenplay of this. And I happen to be in contact now with Nick Mundy of Cracked.com and Screen Junkies because he helps out with some of the Cracked videos I work on. And he happens to be very good friends with The Rock. If you Google Nick Mundy, The Rock, there's some really fantastic videos. Just follow his whole story. It's touching and hilarious and great. But it is kind of cool to think, like, if we were to do a really good job with this script, we have a connection now that we could hand it off to, and that'd be kind of sweet. So Friday, I worked from home in the morning, got some stuff for the Screen Actors Guild done. They're building a new theater. Got some crazy comfortable seats that need to accommodate, Hugh Jackman, George Clooney, John Goodman, all sorts of big guys, and I mean big guys like Hollywood guys, and they all got to be happy in these seats, so we got to get it very right. So there's a lot of fine-tuning decisions going on there. But middle of the day, I leave for Syracuse. This was a fantastic trip, spoiler alert. I had such a great time on this, and I'm going to take you through it as quick as I can while still getting in the key details. I arrive, Sheraton, school puts me up there, they're paying for everything, food, drink, really fantastic, really generous of them, and I get there just in time to run over to the Shine Underground and see what the Warehouse Architecture Theater, group started by Danton Spina and myself back in fall of 2006, 9 years later, here they are, they're in the Shine Underground, they sell out the space, first time a What show has ever sold out anything, and they're putting on Hair. Really cool performance, great singing, great lighting design, and this is kind of cool, I didn't mention this, during the holiday presentations in my office, Jules Fisher, working on Beauty and the Beast and all that now, and of course still Broadway, one of the very first shows he ever worked on Broadway was the original production of Hair back in 1969 or whatever. And so of course seeing my old theater group's production of Hair, I'm looking at the lighting design and being like, oh, I wonder how Jules would have done that. But it was a really cool production. I will say, and I got to meet a bunch of people involved, the director and the different crew and all that, and it's a really big organization now. I mean, obviously he had a full giant ensemble cast, full pit orchestra, there's a huge e-board of people. It's grown enormously since I was there. And as much as I'm thrilled that the organization is doing well and everything's great, I gotta say there's a little part of me that was thinking like, oh wow, this is like the Jurassic World to my Jurassic Park. Like, here's the more successful, glitzier, glossier, more generally palatable version of what we initially started with. So I kind of felt like the guy in Jurassic World wearing the Jurassic Park shirt, being like, man, that first park was legit, you know? Just had a couple dinosaurs, not any visitors or anything, but like, it was so cool, and the seat of that was great. No, we totally sold out, and I don't think what has totally sold out, but it's a different emphasis now because it does seem to be on spectacle and big entertainment stuff, whereas originally the idea was very guerrilla theater. It was just like, you know, let's find time in the middle of the day to do crazy rehearsals in the middle of the night, and we'll put on these shows that, like, they're not going to be musicals, but they're going to be really cool stories, really clever ideas. We're going to do original stuff. We're going to find weird places to perform, and that was really fun, and there was an edgy quality to that I think continued through probably 2013 or so, when like the last of the people that we originally knew at Syracuse graduated. And then, you know, the organization, and by the way, this weekend was great because I got to hang out with so many different alumni, faculty, students, many of whom were involved with what, are involved with what, and I kind of got to get the full rundown of the history of the group and passing on to different people with different visions. And couple times it really was on the border of dying. So, you know, regardless of how it's changed and become something different, it's no longer the Warehouse Architecture Theater, it's just what theater. It's no longer in the architecture school. And talking to Randall Corman, one of the former deans of the school, he was really sad to find out a couple of months ago that it was no longer in the architecture school, because back in 2010, when Syracuse architecture was getting accredited again, there was a performance of Private Jokes, Public Places by Moshe Safdie, son of another Safdie, a famous architect. Famous architect, his son's a playwright, has this really cool show about architectural critique. And so what put on the show that the accreditation board got to see, and they thought that was really wonderful, and it helped give the school really high marks, because one of the things they look for is how do the students perceive the school, how do they perceive their education, and, you know, basically in addition to learning what they need to, are they having a good time? And I think that was a really cool thing that they weren't seeing at any other architecture schools. So no longer being in the architecture school, this year when they get accredited again, there's not really anything like that going on. Anyway, where was I? I kind of lost my train of thought. Anyway, yeah, so I found out there were a couple times when what almost died, like completely, like was totally broke. There was almost like do you remember there's like a time when James Bond had two different movies going on at once? One starred Sean Connery, and one starred like Lazenby or something like that. That was like Octopussy in a different one, because the rights issues were kind of weird. There was a semester like that for what that I didn't know about, where there were like two shows going on, and they were both technically under what, but there was kind of like a fringe element to it. So there's a lot of cool drama going on there. You know, at the heart though, what I get most excited about when I think about what is, yes, the creative outlet it's provided to a lot of different people, but also the relationships that have formed, friendships, actual couples that like are still together who met through this group, and that's really exciting, you know. And in some cases, you know, there will be children that will only be born because these people met each other through this group that Danton and I created back in 2006, and that's a really cool feeling to feel like we've affected people's lives in that kind of way. But yeah, so the group is still doing well. It was really cool to see that. Really cool to catch up with Alice and Keely and Jesper, and meet Alexis Cardwell, who's in charge of it now, and her, you know, various e-board members and all that stuff. So yeah, and the cast. And I didn't go to a cast party Friday night. I was really exhausted, and actually I was going to go to bed, but then after the show I ended up hanging out with friend Deanna, who I was in school with. She graduated. She kind of did like a fast track thing and graduated in 2009, and my God, she had a fantastic, incredible story. Like we both kind of just traded like our life stories since we graduated from school. And you know, she's been through a divorce and like a really awful sickness that her husband had, and a child, and all sorts of different jobs, and she's like shown this incredible tenacity through all this stuff. Like I started by telling my story, and I'm like, oh, you're gonna hear some drama, and her story was even more like intense with higher highs and lower lows. But she's doing really well now. She's got like a beautiful house, beautiful daughter, awesome job. She's really found her niche, and it was really great to catch up with her. So that was cool. And it's always nice too to talk to people who I knew from school who weren't parents then and are parents now, and it's really fun to trade, you know, kid stories, kid advice, that kind of thing. So that was really great. That was Friday night. Went home, Saturday morning, woke up like 5 hours later, put on my glasses, stood in front of the Hall of Languages and decided to like really get in the mindset of an architectural critic, you know, like how rough am I going to be? And of course, you know, I wasn't actually planning on bad-mouthing anyone just for the sake of bad-mouthing them, but I did want to be helpful. You know, I think if I wasn't more conscious, if I wasn't conscious enough about it, my default state might be to just kind of go like, yeah, good job everyone, all right. And obviously as a critic, you know, you got to be a little bit more discerning than that and really help people, you know. Criticism should be a constructive aspect of the process. So these projects were so cool. So if you remember, I met these students very briefly when they're down in New York City. I got to talk to them about VR a couple months ago, show them the stuff I was working on, and their site, I didn't realize this until Saturday, their site was actually a Home Depot on 23rd Street between 5th and 6th, which is the Home Depot that I go to most regularly whenever I need something random. It's this kind of historic site, so it's kind of cool that I knew you know, what it looked like and how the interior of the space felt. And the prompt for these students that they were responding to was basically, take things like the TARDIS in Doctor Who, the portals from the video game Portal, the 3D to 2D shadow qualities of the video game Contrast, moving staircases from Harry Potter, holograms, all these kind of crazy technologies that have been represented in various forms. All those things are real now. They're just real, okay? And now, say it's the year 2065, design the architecture studio of now that uses these tools both, you know, as part of the design of the space itself and then also as tools for the designers occupying the space. And students did things with holograms, with Unity, the video game engine, with VR, with augmented reality, with really cool models. It was really fantastic. So, you know, really shout out to my old Professor Lonsway, who, you know, I mean, I loved him when I was a student there. I had him for 3 classes, and I also would have taken his programming class about, what's that called? Processing, if I had the time. I just wasn't able to. And so, you know, he was able, through a grant at the school, to build this really incredible, technologically sophisticated studio that has all these technologies. Giant tablets, you know, pens where you can draw stuff and push and pull stuff in the air, very Iron Man. And these students really got to take advantage of these really incredible tools, 3D printers and stuff like that. And so I would love to talk about all these projects, but it would take an hour. So I'm just going to go through some very brief highlights. Well, okay, very quickly. I'll go through each project very briefly. Highlight of the first project for me was the way it was playing with how teaching and education in architecture and design might be changing with the advent of holograms and augmented reality. So there was kind of this Cerebro from X-Men-esque room where everyone's sitting in these pod chairs, and there's able to be someone in the middle blowing up, you know, scale models of Parliament and, like, you know, drawing different pictures of it and all that kind of stuff. And then there's other rooms that, you know, totally blank room, but then it's projected to have nature sounds and nature and swinging chairs. And so the interesting thing there was deciding what should be real and what should be virtual. When do you actually need to sit down? When do you need to actually be standing up? One really good challenge that one of the guest critics, Gallo, someone who I knew who actually was part of What very briefly, left Syracuse, went off to MIT, came back, the world's a cool small place. He brought up a really good point in that project, which was that why make the decision that everyone be sitting down? Like, once things become interactive enough that you're not relegated to sitting at a desk staring at a computer, wouldn't everything be, you know, standing desks? Wouldn't everything be like moving around, moving your hands, leaning, much more active? So, you know, that was a really good challenge. Next project was shadows. The idea, that people could become shadows and occupy this space in different ways if they were shadows, and things could be drawn, and then those drawn things could provide resistance, obstacles, opportunities. So they demonstrated this in a really fun way. Like, the first project did all sorts of cool stuff with augmented reality and looking around and pushing and pulling things that helped you understand what the space might feel like. The second group had this very simple thing where they were projecting a shadow onto a curtain, and then you draw something, and then you see that become part of the curtain, and that kind of represented a wall. And then, you know, they had the person become a shadow by going behind the curtain, and then it's like, you know, they drew a chair and a desk and a laptop, and then that person sits down and starts using all those things. So architecturally, they had a really cool study model for this, which had all these vertical planes only oriented on one axis, which, you know, you could make the case like, oh, as a shadow you should be able to be on the floor and in this direction and this direction. But there was a certain clarity about keeping it all to one axis, and just provided some really really cool opportunities for seeing how you could occupy the space. There became some questions about like, what does it feel like when you're in this shadow world? Does it feel claustrophobic? Is there something that defines the depth? Because when you're talking about all these kind of future technologies or what ifs, it's really important to establish rules. We're saying like, okay, if you're a shadow, you are still subject to gravity, but you can't occupy the same space as another person. You have to jump over them, that kind of stuff. So that was cool there. The third project we saw was playing with portals in a really fun way. They had some cool little animations and a nice model with like a webcam and a projector trying to show the idea that something on one side could be on another side. And unlike the video game Portal, they were just kind of taking this position that these portals could just exist and they'd be invisible and you can just kind of push things through here and they'd come out there. And I think it was a really cool design and everything, but I think it lost a little bit by trying to make the portals too invisible, because then there wasn't enough emphasis on the real opportunities that they were affording the occupants. There was also I think they were trying to do a few too many things at once, because then they also had this thing going on with like multi-use objects that could be like a book or a computer, and then there's stuff where you're like playing, there's like holograms where you're playing with, like they did an example of someone playing chess in one room and that same chess set is available in another room. So that's different from a portal because you have like the same object occupying multiple space, that kind of thing. But that was really cool, and I love the video game Portal, and cool to see that used in an architectural context. Then we broke for lunch and I got to hang out more with Gallo and Robin, the second in command professor. Got to get to know her better. I'm sorry, I just called her Robin. Her name is Amber. I think I called her Robin once during the review and I have no idea why. Maybe I knew someone named Robin once who she reminds me of. That was embarrassing. But her name's Amber. Really cool person. Had a background, like, she got licensed as an architect, went back to school doing all sorts of stuff with media studies, and we had fun talking about how it's like, watching students do stuff this cool, it's hard to critique it sometimes when it's just like, how did you do this? When there's just kind of an awestruck quality to watching them, and also realizing like, oh crap, like I need to know how they did all this stuff, because then if we do this kind of studio again, she's like, I have to be able to teach other students how to do similar things so they can build on it. It reminded me a little bit of hearing the great, sadly departed Randy Pausch of Carnegie Mellon talk in his last lecture. Look that up if you have no idea what I'm talking about how when he was doing his multifaceted worlds class. He taught this class at Carnegie Mellon that I think still goes on now, where architects and musicians and game designers and model builders and all sorts of different people would come together and they would build these virtual worlds together. And he talked about the first time he did the studio, where he was so blown away so quickly by what his students were doing that he realized that if he showed how blown away he was by everything, they might become less motivated to try harder, because they'll be like, oh, well, yeah, he's impressed, so this is good enough. So he worked really hard to pretend that he wasn't that impressed. So they'd come in with these incredibly mind-blowing things, and inside he's going, oh my god, this is incredible! And to the student he'd be like, that's pretty good. What if you made that, more realistic or more fluid? Let's see if we can do that a little bit better. And so he did a good job of pushing his students to really excel with these kinds of things. So that was really cool to kind of feel an equivalent sort of spirit in what these students were doing. A lot of them for the studio were using software and tools and equipment that they'd never touched before. And so learning on the fly like that is terrifying and daunting, and also the best way to learn how to use that stuff. I remember my second year of architecture school where none of us had used the laser cutter or AutoCAD, and we had to learn how to use both over the course of like 2 weeks because we were building a study model of Syracuse. So that's a really fun way to learn new techniques. So we broke for lunch. I got to catch up more with Gallo, hear what he's been up to. He's now an adjunct professor at Syracuse. It is funny to imagine this alternate reality where, he was a part of WAT because he was going to be directing the show next semester. But yeah, he's doing really well architecturally, has some really cool projects he's working on. And then this was a cool thing. I was speaking earlier about small worlds. And remind me at the end of this, if you can remind me, to talk about what happened today at my lunch break. But I ended up speaking with one of the other guest critics who was a recent graduate of the grad program, and she was saying that she worked for an architecture firm in DC called LMS, and I was thinking like, that sounds so familiar, where have I heard that before? Turns out she's been working with FMS, the architectural lighting side of my office, on a bunch of different projects, and in fact, during the holiday presentations on Thursday, they were showing this project on the Seagrams building, which, that FMS had worked on this year with LMS, and so it was like, oh wow, I'm actually familiar with your work, and I just saw it a couple days ago. And so we connected and had fun talking about FMS and their experiences with them and my experiences with them, and also our time at SU. And she was a grad student and I was an undergrad, and obviously we didn't cross paths at all. She was there from like 2011 to 2013 or something like that. But yeah, it was cool, and both of us were kind of eating up everything in the studio, being like, oh, it'd be so cool to be back here now to get to play with this stuff. Like, I've been so happy since graduating from Syracuse, minus a few horrible job situations, that kind of stuff. I've been so happy and content with the new software, new techniques, different freelance opportunities that I've been able to find, and basically what I'm saying is I never felt like, oh, I'd really like to go back to school and learn, some new technique, because I've been very happy with what I've been able to teach myself and what kind of jobs I've been able to find using those things that I've taught myself. And this was literally the first time since graduation where, like, looking at these tools and looking at some of these things these students had done, where I was like, oh my god, I wish I was back in school, like, just for a semester, not even with like a class, but just so I could play with these things. Yeah, and I mean, but again, like, the wonderful thing about a studio like that is it really forces you to learn those things quickly because you're very pressed for time. And this was a great prompt, like, everyone's familiar with how an architecture studio works, so adding this incredible technology on top of it and saying, like, what does this technology afford both the space itself and the designers? Really cool. So lunch ended, really lovely lunch provided by the school. Next project we started with. Now at this point we had a really interesting thing going on where, and it made sense that Professor Lonsway wanted to take advantage of this since this was a studio about all sorts of new technologies. He basically brought in a virtual critic, which was someone who is out on the West Coast who wanted to be a part of this, and he's like a video game designer and works in architecture. His name was Jose something. I do want to check out his work, and the video game he was describing sounds really cool. But they basically had him as like a moving computer monitor, and there were several cameras set up in the room, and so he could toggle those different cameras, and then he'd watch the presentations and then kind of critique on them. But it was weird because he's like this weird foreign robot object in the room. So the next project was one that was playing. Excuse you. The next project was one that was playing with this kind of smart material, this almost like smoke particle thing, and at the beginning it was so great. They set up, better than any other group, they established, like, there's this new particle, and they established the rules of it. They're like, okay, you use hand gestures to control it. You never touch it directly. They describe the tactility of it, like it's smooth but hard, and here's the color of it, here's the glossiness of it, and talked about all the different things you could do with it. And so really good job of setting up what this particle could do. But then the presentation just kind of ended, and it's like, oh, okay. So you set up something with a ton of potential, but then didn't really explore the potential that well. And so, yeah, we ended up with seeing some like plans and sections of like, look at the organic rooms that can be formed with this particle, but not much exploration beyond that. So that was unfortunate. Really cool idea. Would love to see them continue with that. Next thing we saw was, I believe, a room. Quick intermission. Let's see if I can get Alistair to giggle. He's been giggling a lot more lately. Usually it goes something like this. He's having a good time. There we go. Okay, we had to do a diaper change, but now we're back! And he's very active and excited to play and do stuff. Hi! Hi! This trip to Syracuse, by the way, was the longest that I've been apart from him, or Liz, since he was born. So that was kind of crazy. Yeah, I was gone Friday, got back Sunday. Where were we? So, okay, next project was playing with kind of the idea of the Harry Potter moving staircases, but like moving rooms. And so, I believe in the Harry Potter universe, it's the fat lady, the painting, who's able to control the staircases. So here there's like a central AI that they jokingly referred to as the fat lady that could control the rooms moving around. And for the sake of clarity, they did kind of a nice idea, which was representing different kinds of programs by different very simple geometric shapes. Assembly rooms were circular, like administrative rooms were hexagonal, there were triangular rooms, square rooms, etc. And so even though that might not make the most sense in terms of actually planning those rooms, diagrammatically it was very clear to see how those different things could come together. Because, you know, one of the problems you ran into with some of these projects is that there's no points of reference for things that might exist in 60 years. Like if you told someone back in 1960, I guess, whoa, back in 1960 to, you know, design an object that can do all the things that our phones can do now, and if someone had just shown, you know, this little flat piece of glass and was like, oh, it has all these things called apps and they do this and this and this and this, it would be a really hard thing to talk about in like a 20-minute critique because there's no points of reference and you're missing the whole history of how those things developed. So I appreciate some of the anachronisms that some of the students stuck with that just help frame things for us in a way that makes sense. You know, there was a discussion, again, Gallo kind of challenged this idea in the first project where they were showing like virtual books that you kind of pull out of thin air and can read these virtual books. And it's like, well, why would we still do that? And, you know, I mean, in the same way that we still use a floppy disk to represent a save file when most people younger than me nowadays don't even know what that icon is or what that object was. But anyway, so this project, very cool animations that they did using the Nitrous engine in 3ds Max. Yeah, I know. And just showed spaces moving around. What I would have liked to see them do is actually create like 4 different configurations that just like work, where they're like, these work. And what would have been helpful about that is A, it would have given us a chance to test the rigor of their layouts and see how well their shapes held up. But also, as someone who, you know, is working on theaters, I recognize that a lot of people and clients and whatnot say that they want flexibility. They say they want to have infinite options when really they want like 4. They want, or even if they don't want 4, they're going to end up using like 4 because it's too inconvenient to think about, you know, all the different permutations and all the different little things of setup that would be required to make the other things happen. So it would have been cool if they were basically like, here's probably the configuration that'd be used if there's, you know, another school visiting and there's like a big design trek going on. Here's a configuration for when there's a big guest lecturer. Here's a configuration for when everyone's working really hard on the night before a big project review. That would have been cool to see. But very cool representation, great animation, really gave you a sense of the human scale of what it's like to be in these moving pods. The daylight thing was kind of cool because it was like a big open ceiling and watching the lighting change as the pods move was kind of neat. Next project used Unity and was playing with this idea of invisible walls where the primary purpose of these invisible walls which weren't even like solid to the touch, were primarily there to create sound barriers. And so they're playing with this idea that to help you understand where the different sound areas were, and you're walking around in the Unity game engine, you can see distortion. And so that's kind of interesting because there's a very large column grid in Hey Zoe, a very large column grid in this Home Depot site, and so the columns are primarily the things where you're noticing the distortion. And so even though they didn't occupy the space with like animated characters or anything like that, they had sounds that kind of made sense for the different rooms. Like the wood and fabrication shop had very loud like kind of stuff, and there's a cafe where you just hear like talkie sounds, and there's a media room where there's the TVs going and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a cool exploration of that kind of stuff. Next project did a really cool job, and this is the final project, probably my favorite. Played with these 2 giant tablets that the school had, and they took advantage of these greatly and made a nice large-scale model of the site where they were talking through putting all these things step by step onto the site. And they're dealing primarily with holograms. So very straightforward. They said holograms, people can become them, and once you're a hologram, you are not affected by gravity. You can stand on empty air, and also you can occupy the same space as other people. So fine, you establish those rules, and then they did some really cool things with that. They also had a great little like opening animation where they go back and forth, and you know, it's like the characters talking through the project and the design process, and like, well, if everyone can do all this stuff with holograms, why do we design a room at all? And they go, oh, well, we want to have different spaces, and we want to deal with the issues of privacy versus public space and that kind of stuff. And so it was really cool seeing their design process and helping to understand how they came to the conclusions they did, and it felt thorough, and it felt like there was a sense of rigor to the whole thing. And the model that they were showing really sold the entire thing, because not only architecturally was it interesting with like floating walls where it's like this wall denotes like a hologram room, but it has an open floor, so on the ground level it's a double height space, but up on the second floor, you know, you're gonna have people in holograms up there. because they recognized and established this rule that holograms could occupy the same space, they're like, oh, well, this site is far too large, far larger than we need to accommodate all the program we want to get in here. So let's push everything to the perimeter. Everyone's got a corner office, great, sunlight and all that kind of thing. And let's put a giant real park in the middle. And as soon as they revealed that, that was just such a refreshing idea, because, everyone's doing all this stuff with this really intense technology, and then here they are being like, oh, you know what, when everything's holographic and there's crazy flashing lights and everything, people are going to want a connection to nature. They're still going to want something that's real and earthbound. And I thought that was such a lovely notion. And, as someone who spends all this time in the city every day and then goes home to a house in the middle of the woods, obviously I think that's absolutely brilliant. So props to them. And the way they did the holograms was really cool, because basically they had little things on the big giant flat screen that, little animations or images and stuff like that. And then in the model, they had little bits of plastic that were reflecting those up, so you had those images kind of superimposed. And by the way, for our virtual guest critic, seeing what he could see on the camera, it looked gorgeous, maybe even better than real life. It had this glowing kind of dollhouse quality, felt very alive and active. And so that was all great. So the critiques ended. I ran to my car, gave Brian and Amber a copy of Rum Run and my dad's Christmas CD just to say thank you, and how grateful I was to be a part of the whole process. I felt like I really enjoyed being a critic. I think I brought to the projects a sense of how they could take things further. I helped them try to be a little bit more rigorous with explaining how they came to the decisions they did. Why did this make sense but not this? And I really just a discussion facilitator. I wasn't too hard on anyone. A lot of what I was saying, the most negative I got was saying what would have really helped clarify this would be if you had developed floor plans that show examples of these configurations, that kind of thing. But it was a lot of fun being guest critic. I had a great time. Moving on from that, I went back to my room, ate some of the leftover food from the night before. That's interesting. Oh, I had dinner with Alice and her girlfriend. Alice was the artist for Terraneo, which I actually have right here, so I'll just pull it out. Alice was the artist for Terraneo, all the cool stuff in here that I can't really open because I'm holding a baby. And then also was doing Death Trap when first was going after I had left the school, and I met her then. And then also she was involved in Dystopia Pia Pia, playing Private Bob Dylan and Miley Cyrus's boyfriend, Miley Cyrus, also known as Cyrus. So really cool person, and it was great to meet her girlfriend. And we talked about life at school and this new magazine she started up, and kind of what it's like wrapping up school and the hopes for post-graduation. So that was really great. We had a nice dinner. I then decided to do something that I haven't done since he was born, which was to see a movie, because I love movies, and there's some cool ones in theaters right now, and I love to discuss and analyze and dissect these things. And also, for the work I'm doing for Cracked, it's really important for me to know, what's going on with the movies that everyone's talking about these days. So I got some really cheap Regal movie passes from the Shine box office, like $8 a pop, and I went back to Destiny USA, which was one of the classes I took with Brian Lonsby, by the way, about this totally insane proposal by Bob Conjol to turn, this little mall in Syracuse into the largest mall in the world, which of course was never going to happen, but Bob Conjol didn't care because he got paid anyway. But went to the Carousel Mall, I'm not going to call it Destiny USA, and saw, in this order, Spectre and then Mockingjay. And I had very mixed feelings about both movies. I probably enjoyed Mockingjay more, and a lot of that has to do with the contrast between their previous movies. So Mockingjay felt very much in line with the other Hunger Games movies. Well acted, really good exploration of PTSD, tonally very consistent. More so than the book, it felt like Hunger Games, like the idea of the pods and the obstacles and making their way through their city as though it was another Hunger Games course really came across well without feeling too gimmicky. Like, it still felt like a war movie with cost and everything. I don't think they trusted the audience enough. There was a lot of very blatant signaling for like, this person is about to die. Let's spend a lot of time with this person for 2 minutes because they're about to die. And that was a little bit sad. There's these creatures that came out in the sewers, referred to as the mutts. I think they're supposed to be different from the mutts in the first movie. And they were terrifying. My God, it reminded me of the creature in Pan's Labyrinth that, eats children and that kind of thing. But, those on crack running at super speeds through the sewers in the dark. So that was terrifying. I think Finnick got a little bit short-shrifted. He was one of my favorite characters. Didn't get a lot of screen time. But, they're doing a lot of stuff in here. Mockingjay, anyway, great. I enjoyed it fine. Spectre, I had a lot of problems with because Christoph Waltz is a born Bond villain. He's really cool in that role. I'm spoilers, by the way, if you haven't seen the movie. I have a lot of trouble anytime a movie about a fairly regular guy who's doing extraordinary things takes a turn like this, where it's like, oh yes, James, remember that half-brother you had as a child who killed his father in an avalanche? He's now the world's most notorious mastermind, and in addition to controlling the entire world, he's been going out of his way to make your life a living hell. And not only did they do that, which I don't like, but they also tried to connect it to all the other Daniel Craig Bond movies and be like, I have been the author of all your pain and suffering. And there wasn't even an explanation for that. Like, you look at something like Luke, I Am Your Father in The Empire Strikes Back, or all the incredible seeds that J.K. Rowling planted in the Harry Potter books, where, quick discussions of Sirius Black or Peter Pettigrew in the first book come to mean so much more in like the fourth or fifth book. There was nothing like that in the Bond movies. Like, this wasn't a framework that was being laid ahead of time that then was like, oh, it all makes sense now. I felt very shoehorned. The action set stuff was fine, was good. The movie was very slapsticky, had a weird sense of humor that I don't really like in a James Bond movie. And the characters weren't used that well. For some reason, Lea Seydoux is supposed to be the new Eva Green, like Vesper Lynd, where Bond is willing to give up his life to go live with her, and they say they love each other, and I don't believe them, either of them. It doesn't make any sense. So that was strange, and I'm listening to an interview with Sam Mendes now, who seems to be really proud of the movie. He spent 2.5 years of his life working really hard on this, and I mean, I don't know, it's tough. Like, luckily I've never worked harder on one thing than like 6 months of my life, and so even if someone didn't like the thing I made that much, I guess really the only thing I worked on that long is my Breaking Bad Weird Al Albuquerque video, and even then, like, if someone says like, oh, I don't like that, like, I can kind of brush it off. But I can't imagine working on a movie, a big movie, this long and having the result be this kind of mediocre. There's something really depressing about it, because there's a lot of talent there, a lot of potential. I don't really know where it went wrong yet. Maybe I'll find out. So that was movies. Came back. It was around midnight at that point. I was going to hang out with Keely and Jesper, a couple of the other people who were in charge of what while I was there. They were too tired. They fell asleep. So I went to sleep too. Took a bath. Every time I stay in a hotel, I think it's really fun to take a bath. Something I never get to do. Little intimate detail about me. Hotel baths. And then the next morning, I woke up really early, had breakfast with Keely and Jesper, which was lovely, and kind of got some great what stories from them, hearing how it was when they took over the group and the productions they did, and various falling outs, and where they are now. They got to study abroad in really cool places, France and Hong Kong respectively, and I feel like I really clicked with those two, which is cool because I've spent a total of like 3 hours of my entire life in their presence, and they're very much what people, and that was great. So then, last thing I needed to do before booking it home so that my wife could go off to a performance of The Messiah was meet with Randall Corman, who was one of the deans of the School of Architecture, really cool guy. He's also the father of my wife and I's friend Alex Corman, who we lived with in London and became very close with. So I got to hang out with Randall, talked about the book that he's writing about facades, which was the class he taught at Syracuse, and got to hear about all sorts of cool stories and how the school has changed over the last few years, and it was great. He is very much like a father figure, and very, very comfortable to hang out with him. And it's kind of cool post-school where, like, there's always, even if you're close with a professor, there's always a little bit of a relationship in school where it's like, I'm the professor, you're the student, and it's not just respect, there's still like a certain kind of barrier that I think stays that way. And because I'm out of school, like it really is just a friendship now. It's like there's still a mentor element to it, but it's like, hey, we're just hanging out, this is great, let's have some tea together. I also gave him a copy of Rum Run, which I hope he has many a fun time with at his summer house with his son and other friends. So that was great. Drove home, had a fantastic time. Looks like the battery's gonna die soon. I guess the only other thing is, yeah, that was great. Spent last night working a little bit more on my Equinox stuff. He's sleeping. When did he fall asleep, and when did that camera almost die? And then today just very quickly was cool because I wasn't feeling well today. I'm eating some frozen food that some friends had brought us a couple months ago, when very kindly they were like, oh, once you guys have a baby, you're not going to be able to eat much, so put some like mashed potato stuff in the freezer. Eating it now, I don't think it's agreeing with me much, so I feel a little bit ill in my tummy. But all that being said, lunch was really cool today because I walked out of my office and just totally randomly, like, first person I see on the street is my good friend Alex Zarowski, who, you know, has been a fantastic house sitter for us. He's worked with me on theater stuff, on Spider-Gwen stuff, on Cracked stuff. We've been friends since 2004. We've been both through the Cornell summer program together, and, you know, such a small world. He's doing a freelance project right now for a company that is like right across the street from my office. So we hung out, had a great lunch. Things were great. A woman who makes her living as a documentary filmmaker as well as voice actor just ended up speaking to us on a park bench. That was cool, meeting new people. And then I came home, and I'm here now, and I'm not feeling that well, so I think I'll probably take tomorrow off, spend some time with him, work more on my Equinox stuff, and holidays are coming up. Still got a few vacation days, a couple sick days here and there. I think I'm going to use them because I'm having a great time, but I am pretty much exhausted all the time these days. So, you know, let's not overwork myself too much. Life is good though. Things are going great. This year is wrapping up really well. Thinking about next year. Whoops, sorry, buddy. I do think that I'm going to end up doing this idea of like learning something new every week, just something really quick. And then all I'll say is that every week I need to either record a video or write something that kind of just summarizes what I learned so that the stuff doesn't get lost, or at least so I have a reference to go back and look at it. So that'd be kind of cool. Oh, and then a quick Christmas special thing. I watched Mickey's Nutcracker last night with Alistair, which very dear to my heart. I remember watching it a lot growing up, and all sorts of different Christmas memories are associated with it, from getting Metal Gear Solid to different Legos that my brothers and I were working on. And I basically grew up thinking that the music from the Nutcracker had these lyrics from the Mickey Mouse version, which my wife hates. Totally justifiably, because she's familiar with the original Nutcracker, which of course is just Tchaikovsky's beautiful music, no words involved. Last year around this time, by the way, I actually got to see the Nutcracker for the first time in the city. My wife and I went to see that at the Metropolitan, something like that, Metropolitan Opera? I don't know. But that was really cool. And so I have both associations, and they can both live in tandem, and I love the Mickey Mouse version, and I love the real version. And the Mickey Mouse version, I'm realizing, like, the way that story is told, there's a kind of fourth wall breaking element to it, and it's kind of fun and lighthearted and cheeky, and I think the more I think about it, it's really influenced my writing and my storytelling. So anyway, that's cool. Thank you for watching this long episode, but life is good, year's wrapping up well. Yes, have an excellent week. Talk to you next week. Hope you like our tree. There's also some lights. Quick tour of the lights. Lights. Holiday spirit. Baby Alistair. Uh-oh, he's up. What's up, buddy? Say goodbye. Bye. Hey. Can you smile?